Good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Mikey, okay, here we go with Lead Better for the 22nd of July. You were a little bit out of audio sync. I know Mikey's on a cruise ship, but so dedicated to admired leadership and Lead Better that he's here. And we're talking about our field note today, which has the title, Why Asking a Lot from Team Members Makes Them More Committed. Now, it's another side because the other day we were talking about leaders who are obsessed with excellence and they become monsters. Somewhere there's a place where we land where we can actually be demanding as leaders or have high standards and it actually works. So let's try to figure this out. Mikey, we can try it here and see if you're back in sync.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can hear me.
There you go. Now we're looking good. There we go.
Right. So it becomes an interesting metaphor, which isn't introduced until the middle of the field note itself. But for those who aren't aware of the transfer portal, which if you've been paying attention to college football, you can't be even a casual fan of college football without being aware that the transfer portal now exists.
Right.
Which essentially
I was lightly aware, but this field note, I was like, oh, not only is this a thing for college athletics, and now I understood it better, but it actually is the real world for many of us all the time.
Right. And so if you, for instance, are a star running back at Arizona State in your freshman year, and for whatever reason, someone else on the team replaces you on the starting roster, and now in your sophomore year, you feel like you're not going to get enough playing time, but your NFL career dictates that you should be starting so that you get as much stats as possible padded. It used to be prior to 2 or 3 years ago that you were pretty much stuck in that situation, trying to earn your spot back at Arizona State University, where you first, got out of high school. And if you weren't going to, make the starting rotation, then there wasn't much you can do, because in order to leave the school, you were going to be giving up a year of eligibility. And many people don't want to do that. And you might even have to sit out a year. There were different rules that dictated. Well, in the last 2 or 3 years, everything has now changed to favor the athletes. And not only is the transfer portal something that you can enter at any time in really any year, but you have the ability now to be recruited with dollars to leave. And so there might be some big SEC school who's looking for a second string kid to come and might be offering more money for you to sit on the bench than what you might be able to make at a Big Ten school that might not have the exact same kind of budget because whatever reason that it is. And so this transfer portal does put us in this weird spot. And it's great that it's not just an analogy. Coaches have other ways now that they need to motivate and inspire their players to stick around, right? And if it's not just going to be about money, and there's equal money everywhere, how is it that coaches can actually motivate and inspire these guys to stick with the team?
Sure. Well, I went because I was thinking about the study I once read about that they did on Coach K at Duke, where they looked at the people over decades who had transferred away from that program, probably had specific reasons for doing it, and they ended up as a group performing worse at the new schools. Now, that was probably back in that other thing where maybe you had to sit out and maybe you lost a step because of that, or there were other consequences. Now, the other point here is the kind of performer who might be drawn because of more money and there's an NIL deal or whatever it is that is attractive. Maybe that's not the right priority for them as an athlete, but we'll get to the implications of this. But do you think that longitudinal study of Coach K would be true now if you started from the point of the transfer protocol and looked at it? Or is that gap year or the cost of it, has that changed the dynamic?
I think it really has. And I don't think we really understand. I mean, NIL money has changed 3 times in the last 3 seasons, like how it's actually doled out. And so there's just not enough time for us to understand how these impacts in college sports have changed the way that both coaches and players would behave. But the more important thing is to recognize in our organizations, we've had an open transfer portal forever. Like we've just never even thought about it that way, but it's always existed.
Now, I came out of a field where it wasn't exactly the case, because I was a television news anchor in local markets, and here in Pittsburgh where I am, and there was often something that they called a contract with a non-compete, where you could not like immediately go to the station across town and get in a bidding war and you're going to pop up. And why? What was the actual reason for that? It was, well, we've spent money as a station beyond your salary, making you well known. We've promoted you. We've made you an entity. And so they would do that. And then you often hear about people that, that have non-competes for a particular geographical area. The guy that's cut my hair for the last, 20, 25 years left one place where he was cutting hair, and he wasn't allowed to cut hair within 5 miles of that place, for a period of time. Now, the courts are making that much more difficult. And I think the field note is kind of getting to this purity of saying, what kind of leader are you? Are you the kind of leader that people would love to work for, want to work for, would be anguished if they couldn't be working on your team? And if that's not the case, then you have some things to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's really about this relationship skill. That was the field note that we talked about on Sunday, in terms of people who are obsessed with excellence end up becoming monsters. Like this is the other end of it. Like it's people leave all the time. Like, this transfer portal is now available. A guy like Bobby Knight might not have survived with his coaching style as long as he did with the way that the transfer portal works now. And it's not just that he needs to be, more empathetic, more caring. Like this isn't a softening of the way that it people can still be. And that's the point here, right?
Yep.
The idea that a guy like Bobby Knight, who was very demanding, even to the point of chair throwing, did that in such a way that people would probably, if they had the option, get away from it. But he had a reputation about him that he would demand excellence in such a way that it would actually create championship teams.
Right.
So people who are driven to be on championship teams might find that way of working very appealing, right? And that's kind of what we have here. And so it might, for those that don't have like championship aspirations in their mind, this whole idea in this field note might feel a little bit harsh. Like, I don't really want my boss to be more demanding, right? And that's the critical part here. It needs to start with the idea that I understand you as a person. I understand who we are. And as a result of the relationship that we have, me challenging you more is not just me cracking a whip, right? What it means is that I understand that I'm going to see for you goals that you might not even see for yourself yet. I have higher aspirations than you have. And of course, what better way to be a fan than have giant aspirations for somebody else?
Sure. Yeah. And fanness is an admired leadership phrase that we like to underline a lot, which is, are you the kind of leader who's demonstrating that you're the fan of your people all the time, and you're showing it in your behaviors? You want their ball to go in. One of the things that we mistake in terms of whether it's a Bobby Knight or even a Steve Jobs is sometimes leaders are conditioned by what they saw in terms of, maybe that actually inspired them to some degree or another. But whether that's the best model or pattern, you got to step back and look at that, because people would self-select in to work with Steve Jobs, even though objectively you could say, this is not a situation that most leaders could replicate or duplicate or should want to. That doesn't mean that there weren't enormous lessons to learn from Steve Jobs. Certainly that was the case, and standards and a degree of the perfectionism. But some of the things that we see beyond that, I can't remember who I heard it say it. They said, you kind of learn the best lessons and the worst lessons from like football coaches. Like, you have plenty of stories. Oh, that guy was terrible and just destroyed, my psyche. Or that person has built me up. So these are all sort of, little laboratories where we can see these things. And I think that then the question here is, the caring, the fanness, the demonstration of I'm not going to let you be less than you could be, and we as an organization are going to do something really significant. And I think that's the part of this, which is, are you buying in to do something significant with your life where you feel like there is somebody who's guarding your dreams, who is going to bring out the best in you? Well, you're not going to want to be in any place else, or it's going to be a pretty special place if you do leave.
And when we try to think behaviorally about what this looks like, there's probably an example in everybody's mind. Most of us have that teacher in junior high who we felt like for the first time really challenged us, really saw us for who we were, and challenged us in such a way that it was a bigger idea that they had for us than I had for myself, right? And even though they may have had the reputation for being the toughest teacher in middle school, you learn to love and appreciate them because of that. And so seeing some of those behaviors and seeing like what was very effective of that is a great way to be able to understand that. I think there's room for that in education for those types of teachers to really show up.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that all the behaviors of Bobby Knight need to be dismissed.
No,
right?
no. There can be things
Certainly not an admired leader, right? Because
Yeah.
he didn't blend the idea of relationships and performance in the kind of person who we would think of as admired. But there are things to still learn from him as someone who produced excellence, even though his relationship skills weren't there at all.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's kind of exciting when you look at the research, and it's been a while since I read through this, but I remember reading about sort of the neuroscience of expectations and how our parents, leaders, coaches set a standard of expectation for us. What they see in us legitimately can actually reshape the brain. They've done the brain scans with the fMRIs and all of that. And the field note makes a reference to the Pygmalion effect, right? The idea of the what was it in Greek mythology? The sculptor believes, the beauty of the statue and the sculptor's belief in it brings the statue to life. And
Right.
we often don't think about it back to we think about the more recent applications or movies, but that neuroscience is really powerful. And I think one of the things that we would say, whether you're driving a Navy SEAL team where people are trying to get people to drop out during Buds Week, right, and the training protocol, and saying, all right, you're going to ring the bell to drop out, that's a different thing than for most of our teams where we're trying to kind of set these zones of proximal development, right? Where you as a leader, it doesn't do you any good to set high standards that are so wildly out of reach that nobody's going to get there. You will have people transfer to the other school. But when you can take people and say, we're here, and here's where we're going to get, and it's that next 10 or 20% zone, than it is we're going to try for 200% improvement here. Now you have a chance to actually have a team that's committed to making that happen, and you're attracting the right people into that environment.
Do you think these days, generally speaking, leaders are afraid to challenge people because they feel like any sort of challenge is just going to push people out the door? That maybe workers' rights are at such a high in equilibrium in history at this point that I can't challenge them without feeling like I'm going to stress them out and make them leave.
I think that the opportunity there is a universal one, which is it is not the fact that you should lower standards. It's that you need to find a way, and maybe you just haven't become a sophisticated or nuanced enough leader that you've created a vision that is high enough. Because actually, in many cases right now, there's been certainly more articles in the last year or two around corporations have more of the power now. There seem to be people being like, well, if you're not going to let me work from home, this other company will. Well, all of that's changing now. And so the corporations are having a little more of a heavier hand in what they will accept and what they won't. But in the end, that isn't going to make it in terms of where are we going as a civilization? Because I know there are pockets of the civilization, but we're kind of very global at this point. And I think that if you were going to say, well, okay, we have political crises and military crises and all these things, there is a pervasive, some kind of, people will say it's a meaning crisis or a metaphysical crisis. And I do think that it's to some degree because when in our teachers, our leaders, haven't set an expectation that is high enough, noble enough, inviting enough. And whether or not that leads to sort of a short-term shakeout, I think that the leaders that become really committed and sophisticated and have a very generative worldview of how they're calling people together to do significant work, they're going to win in the end. Their people are going to win in the end.
Right. I can't help but think of a guy who was instrumental in my life, Dave Thompson, who called me out when I was a college freshman. And the way he did it, he said, "You know who you remind me of?" And then he said a person's name who I was like, "Oh, that's aspirational for me."
Yeah,
He's
right.
like, "I knew him when he was a freshman, and you remind me
Yeah.
of him a lot."
Yeah.
And I remember that conversation. I remember where we were.
Vividly,
I remember how
yeah.
he said it. I remember how it made me feel. And he was doing exactly this. He didn't even realize he was doing it probably, but it was fantastic. It was that thing. And I've said now, thinking back on it, right? I want to have that. I want to make other people feel that way. I want to inspire people and motivate people in the same way. That's one way to do it. We should be doing it much more often.
All right, Mikey, thank you. Great edition of Lead Better.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time today. We'll talk tomorrow.